Hello, this is Ruslan Belov again. Well, yesterday Zelensky gave a speech. Guess what he said? He said that Putin and Trump are meeting, and no matter what they agree on, he will not withdraw troops from the Donetsk region. Even if Trump and Putin reach some sort of deal, he will not comply with it. And, as I've said before, as long as Zelensky is in power, peace is a very distant prospect. So the fighting continues, and we continue to study the situation at the front. All right, friends, the collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Dobropillia direction continues. All those fairy tales you may have heard yesterday about how they allegedly stopped the Russian army are now pushing them back. Everything is under control. That this isn't a full-fledged breakthrough, but just infantry slipping through. They can keep those fairy tales to themselves. For the second day in a row, we are taking more than 100 square kilometers. Here, take a look. American cartographers drew this area on the map over the past day. Well, does this look like the Ukrainian armed forces have everything under control? I should clarify that this map is slightly delayed, by about a day, and only now have we received objective control footage. But this footage clearly shows that the Russian army here is not holding some thin corridor, as Ukrainian map makers, such as Deep State and others, are drawing. In fact, it was exactly by relying on Ukrainian maps that yesterday they started pushing the anti-crisis narrative. Supposedly, it's just small reconnaissance groups, a thin corridor, and they'll be cut off and destroyed with a counterattack. Really? Does this look like a thin corridor? Of course not. This section alone is 84 square kilometers. In this case, American cartographers are surprisingly more objective than the Ukrainian ones. They show full control here, not some narrow strip. Let's measure it, just so you understand. The narrowest point is almost 6 kilometers wide, more than enough to not worry about being cut off by a counterattack. So far, the depth of the advance is over 11 kilometers. Villages under control include Volne, Kucherev Yar, and Vesyole. By the way, I told you yesterday already that Vesyole was under Russian control, and now we have visual confirmation. Russian troops have also entered the eastern outskirts of Novoe Shakovo and the eastern outskirts of Stepi, and control almost all of Rubezhne. Ukrainian forces are only on the western edge. Control of Rubezhne and Stepi is extremely important, because it will allow the Russians to cut the Dobropillia-Kramatorsk highway and block the city from the north. As for Zolotoy Kolodez, the southern part is definitely under Russian control, and the part across the river is still uncertain, only because there's no video, although local fighters say it's under Russian control. Friends, a small request before we continue. If you enjoyed this video, please support the channel by subscribing, giving it a like, and writing in the comments where you're watching us from and what you think about what we've described. And now, let's continue. In addition, Russian reconnaissance groups are actively operating here. Yesterday, footage came in showing Russian DRG units at the bus station in Dobropillia. Do you know where that is? Right here, almost in the city center. Ukrainian forces have redeployed Azov fighters here. That's a confirmed fact. Now the question is, what will they achieve? Yesterday, there were reports that Azov units had been sent to this breakthrough area. The Ukrainians immediately got excited. Now we'll counterattack, push them out, take everything back. Reality will be different. What can Azov do? They can try to stop the Russian army, stand in front of Dobropillia to keep them from entering, launch counterattacks to force the Russians to focus on defense rather than further advances. And that's about it. They absolutely cannot recapture the 170 square kilometers the Russians have taken here in the past few days. Think about these numbers. The confirmed breakthrough, confirmed on video, is 170 square kilometers. In reality, it's closer to 200. Do you really think the much-hyped Azov fighters will arrive and change something? Maybe if it were really such a narrow strip as Ukrainian maps show, but reality is different. The best they can do is distract attention and slow the Russian advance. Even the Bild correspondent panicked, writing the following, I quote, "To retake these territories, the Ukrainian armed forces have only a few days before Russian forces bring in drones and mechanized units to secure the area. In that case, the last two major Donbas cities, Slovyansk and Kramatorsk, will be cut off from Dnipro and will only be able to receive supplies via Kharkiv. and Ukraine will be unlikely to hold the region in the long term. The Dobropillia breakthrough, prospects first, about the gains. Currently under Russian control, the villages of Pankivka, Volne, Novoye Shakovo, Novi Donbass, Ivanivka, Rubezhny, Kutuzovo, Novovodyany, and Zolotoy Kolodez. Fighting continues around Kucharev Yar and along the Marevka-Petrovka-Novotroitske line. The city of Dobropillia is being encircled from both sides, from the north, between Belozerske, and from the south, from Novi Donbass. Dobropillia lies in a lowland and is essentially doomed. Judging by the speed of the Russian advance and the inaction of the Ukrainian armed forces, the AFU command is in the state of a dog on a highway. Total confusion, no understanding of priorities, and no idea where to rush first to save the situation. Why did this happen? Many people don't realize that Ukraine's defense structure is quite complex, with two main components: the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AAFU, and the Territorial Defense Forces. These are not the same thing. In the Pokrovsk, Krasnoarmeysk sector, based on open data, the following AFU units are deployed: 9th Army Corps, 47th Magura Brigade, 68th Jaeger Brigade, 100th Brigade, 142nd Infantry Brigade, 7th Rapid Reaction Corps, Air Assault Forces, 25th Separate Airborne Brigade, 14th National Guard Brigade, 71st Jaeger Brigade, 148th Brigade, plus the 3rd Operational Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine. All these units are at the front in or around Krasnoarmeysk, but in the rear, in the Dobropillia sector, it's mainly territorial defense brigades. Training, equipment, and, most importantly, motivation are all far worse there than in regular units. That's why they sit mostly on the 2nd and 3rd defensive lines, 10-15 kilometers from the front line. The Russian breakthrough went exactly to that depth and keeps pushing further every day. Naturally, yesterday's forcibly mobilized Ukrainian troops did not expect such intensity. As a result, they made the wise decision to retreat to rear positions, abandoning even well-fortified company and platoon strongpoints. And there are quite a few of those, judging by the alarmed reports from the Ukrainian side. What's next? The likely plan. Based on the pattern of the Ocheretine breakthrough, we can now expect the zone of control to expand. Along the road to Kramatorsk, toward the Andriivka-Varvarivka line, securing the Dobropillia-Belozerske line with a further advance toward the Samara River near Oleksandrivka, and most importantly, moving toward Ocheretine with a longer-term goal of reaching Barvinkov. Barvinkov is essentially the key to all of Donbass. In 2022, Russian forces advancing from Izium sought in many ways to partially repeat the objectives of the Barvenkovo-Lozovaya operation of 1942. Back then, the Red Army was supposed to advance from the northeast, cut off Army Group South, pin it against the Sea of Azov, and destroy it. But as in the last century, this goal was not achieved for various reasons. Now, however, the Russian army is attacking from the south, and in this configuration, from a logistical standpoint, the Barvenkovo-Izium line plays a key role in supplying the Slovyansk-Kramatorsk grouping of the Ukrainian armed forces. For now, we are only seeing the beginning of this plan and the collapse of the Ukrainian defenses in the north of the DPR. Given how painful, first and foremost in terms of reputational damage, the loss of cities is for Ukraine, cities they are fighting for furiously and recklessly, just to make sure their fall is not known in the West. The most combat-ready units of the northern Donbass front will likely remain in Krasnoarmeysk, Pokrovsk, as well as in Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, and Izium, relying on prolonged urban combat. Therefore, there is a significant chance to cut their logistics and strike into the rear of their garrisons. It's important to understand that they have problems not only here in the north, in the Dobropillia area. And what about Rodinske? Well, I'll tell you, Russian troops have pressed on and taken control of a powerful fortified area that was blocking their advance, the mine and its spoil heap. From there, they managed to advance and break into the city, securing positions in the eastern part of Rodinske. Again, this is not just my words, there's video evidence confirming it. So we can officially note, the battle for the city began on August 12th. In addition, the Ukrainian armed forces are facing problems in Kharkiv region. Over the past 24 hours, Russian troops advanced 3.6 kilometers from the border toward the village of Ambanoyo. From their current positions, it's only about 1.5 kilometers to the village, practically nothing. It's clear that very soon they'll straighten this small salient to make the front line more stable. In short, the AFU are losing ground here as well. Over the past day, there has also been movement not only near Rodinska, Mirnograd and Selidovo, but also near Pokrovsk. Not in the city itself, but on the western flank, in the urban-type settlement of Udakhnoye. There, Russian forces advanced 900 meters inside the settlement and cleared the entire area to the south, with a total advance of 2.7 kilometers. Why is this important? Because Udakhnoye is a powerful fortified area, and if it falls, the Russian army will have a much easier time on this entire western flank. Yes, there's still a mine there, but it could be bypassed without engaging in combat. And in Pokrovsk itself, the AFU situation is actually very poor. I told you about this yesterday. Even Ukrainian cartographers have started to mark it on their maps. Cautiously for now, they're showing only thin tentacles of Russian advances, but in reality, Russian troops have reached the villages of Shevchenko and Novoalexandrovka, putting the AFU garrisons in Pokrovsk-Mirnograd on the brink of full encirclement. More than that, I saw a report yesterday that Russian reconnaissance groups had already been spotted in Grishino, and that's a big warning sign. The situation is straightforward. If Grishino falls, it's over. Over for Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, and over for all AFU troops trapped there. How many are there? I don't know for sure. I tried yesterday to find information across Ukrainian and American sources. Estimates vary. The lowest figure I saw claimed about 5,000 AFU troops remain in Pokrovsk-Mirnograd. The highest, 10,000. The truth is probably somewhere in between, meaning around 7,000, 8,000 soldiers are still concentrated there, and they still aren't retreating. Understand this, the front line has already moved 20 kilometers north. Supply roads are cut. Russian forces are pushing toward Grishino, and yet the AFU stay put. I know why. Putin's meeting with Trump on the 15th. If the AFU retreats now, and they urgently need to, it would create a very bad image for Zelensky, for Ukraine, and for the AFU. Trump would see that large cities fell so quickly, meaning Russia is not just holding good cards, but a royal flush. That's why they're staying, despite the fact that in a couple of days, all exits will be sealed. To sum up, in the past 24 hours, 102.5 square kilometers came under Russian control. The day before that, it was 112. Over the last 2 days, the Russian army has taken 215 square kilometers, the largest gain since March 2022. That's all for the frontline situation for today. Now let's look at the political arena. Our source in Zelensky's office reports that the presidential administration is ready to make territorial concessions to Russia, but is frightened by several factors, according to the Telegram channel Legitimny. First, personal guarantees from the US for the so-called office elite. In plain terms, Zelensky and Yermak want guarantees that they will be allowed to continue ruling Ukraine. These are personal, self-serving interests, as both fear losing power, which would lead to the collapse of Zelensky's personality cult and the dispossession of the entire so-called elite. Second, image. Zelensky lives by headlines and media mentions. For him, simply being in Alaska and then signing what needs to be signed is important, because he can sell it to his voters as a victory. I saved the statehood, and so on. If Trump and Putin settle things between themselves and simply tell Zelensky to comply, it would humiliate him as a leader and threaten his hold on power. He fears losing power far more than losing Kramatorsk, or even Kharkiv and Poltava. According to the source, the current struggle among all players in the Ukrainian crisis is for personal gain. The globalists are trying by any means to prolong the war. Zelensky is trying to bargain for the best possible terms for himself from both sides of his sponsors. Incidentally, any outcome suits Russia. Each scenario has its benefits. For the first time in years of the Ukrainian crisis, it is even more advantageous for Russia to continue the war than to seek peace, because it is fully mobilized on a war footing and has accelerated its military locomotive, which, according to experts, could lead to the complete collapse of the Zelensky regime by 2027. Of course, the globalists will try to sabotage any peace deal, since they needed Ukraine to weaken Russia. Europe is in panic, preparing for war and carrying out rearmament on a historic scale, writes the Financial Times. In Ukraine, EU military factories are expanding 3 times faster than in peacetime, already covering more than 7 million square meters of new industrial space. The publication analyzed the construction of facilities linked to ammunition and missile production, the 2 bottlenecks in Western support for Ukraine. By the end of the year, the EU plans to increase shell production to 2 million units, trying to match Russia's pace. However, insiders say the actual output may fall short of potential capacity. Trump backs off, tariffs against China delayed by 90 days. Donald Trump has once again postponed tariffs against China. He signed an order freezing the tariff hike on Chinese goods for another 90 days. The order came into effect just hours before the deadline Trump had set for trade talks between Washington and Beijing. In the spring, Trump had ordered tariffs on Chinese goods to be raised first to 125% and then to 145%, to which China responded in kind, after which Trump rolled the tariffs back. Apparently, the introduction of tariffs against China over purchases of Russian oil is also being delayed.